13,000 years ago, a culture spread across the entire North American continent with a speed that archaeologists still struggle to explain. They left behind stone spear points of a distinctive and technically demanding design, found from Alaska to Mexico, from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific, made with a consistency that implies shared knowledge transmitted across enormous distances. They hunted the largest animals on Earth. Then, in the space of what the geological record suggests was a very short time, both the hunters and most of their prey were gone. The mammoths disappeared, the mastodons disappeared, the giant ground sloths, the American horses, the camels native to North America, all gone. And the Clovis people, as archaeologists call them, disappeared from the archaeological record at almost exactly the same moment. What ended them is one of the most contested questions in North American prehistory. Based on excavation records, geological analysis, and peer-reviewed scientific debate, this is the story of the Clovis people. Who they were, what they built, and what may have killed them. The story of the Clovis people begins not with a dramatic expedition, but with a drought. In the early 1930s, severe dry conditions in eastern New Mexico lowered the water level of an arroyo near the town of Clovis, exposing sediment layers that had been sealed for thousands of years. A local cowboy named Ridgely Whiteman noticed unusual bones eroding from the bank and reported them to the American Museum of Natural History. When archaeologists arrived and excavated the site, they found what no one had previously documented in the Americas: stone spear points embedded in the bones of extinct Pleistocene animals, in a stratigraphic layer that could only be read as ancient. The points themselves were remarkable. Each one was made from a single piece of flint or chert, shaped by removing thin flakes from both faces until a symmetrical, leaf-shaped blade was produced. The distinctive feature, the one that gave the Clovis tradition its technical signature, was a long groove, called a flute, removed from the base of each point on both sides. Fluting a stone point without breaking it requires precise control of force and angle that takes considerable skill to develop. The technique served a practical function, allowing the point to be more securely hafted to a wooden shaft, but it also required a level of craft investment that went beyond simple functional necessity. What made the Clovis discovery transformative for American archaeology was the dating. The sediment layer containing the points was deposited approximately 13,000 years ago, placing the Clovis culture at the end of the last ice age, far earlier than most researchers at the time believed humans had been present in the Americas. Subsequent finds at dozens of sites across North America confirmed both the date and the remarkable geographical spread of the Clovis tradition. The same distinctive point type, made with the same fluting technique, appeared from New Mexico to Nova Scotia, from the Gulf Coast to the edge of the Great Plains. The craft of making stone tools by carefully removing flakes, called flint knapping, is one of the oldest human technologies, practiced in various forms for more than 2 million years. What distinguished the Clovis people's approach was not the basic technique, but the specific combination of skills required to produce the fluted point consistently and at scale. Modern experimental archaeologists who have learned traditional flint knapping typically report that fluting is one of the most technically demanding operations in the entire toolkit. The removal of the channel flake that creates the flute involves applying force at a precise angle to a point in the base of an already shaped piece of stone, with no margin for error. A mistake at this stage destroys the entire point. The consistency of Clovis points across thousands of kilometers of geography implies that the knowledge of how to make them was transmitted reliably across a large and dispersed population. This kind of knowledge transmission does not happen automatically. It requires either direct teaching between generations within communities or contact between communities that maintained a shared technological standard across a wide network. Either way, it implies social connections and communication. patterns operating at a continental scale among people who, by the standard model of their period, should have been living in small, isolated bands. The raw materials used in Clovis points add another dimension to this picture. Analysis of the stone used at specific sites has identified materials that originated hundreds of kilometers away from where the finished points were found. Obsidian from sources in the Rocky Mountains appears at sites on the Great Plains. High-quality flint from quarries in the Midwest appears at sites in the Southeast. The movement of these materials implies either long-distance travel by individual groups or exchange networks connecting communities across the continent, a level of interregional interaction that was not expected for a population of Ice Age hunter-gatherers. When the Clovis people arrived in North America or developed their distinctive technology there, depending on which model of their origins is correct, the continent was home to a fauna unlike anything alive today. Woolly mammoths and American mastodons roamed in large numbers. Giant ground sloths, some as large as modern elephants, browsed the forests. American horses, camels, and tapirs shared the grasslands with giant bison. Short-faced bears, the largest bear species ever to live in North America, competed with American lions and dire wolves for prey. It was a continent of megafauna, large-bodied animals that had evolved without human predators, and that therefore had no inherited behavioral response to human hunters. Clovis kill sites, locations where archaeological evidence confirms that Clovis people hunted and butchered specific animals, have been found at multiple locations across North America. The most extensively documented involve mammoths and mastodons, which appear to have been primary prey for at least some Clovis communities. At sites like Murray Springs in Arizona and Lena Ranch, also in Arizona, researchers have found Clovis points associated with mammoth remains in stratigraphic contexts that confirm the association is genuine rather than coincidental. The hunting strategy implied by the evidence involves approaching large animals at close range, close enough to drive a spear point into vital areas, which required either ambush techniques, driving animals into terrain that restricted their movement, or a degree of boldness that reflects confidence in the effectiveness of the technology and the hunter's skill. Experimental work has confirmed that a well-made Clovis point, hafted on a sturdy shaft, can penetrate the thick hide and reach the vital organs of large animals, though the practical difficulty of getting close enough to use it should not be underestimated. The relationship between Clovis hunters and megafauna extinction is one of the most debated questions in North American paleontology, and it feeds directly into the mystery of what eventually happened to the Clovis people themselves. At the end of the Pleistocene epoch, approximately 10,000 to 13,000 years ago, North America lost roughly 70% of its large mammal species. Mammoths, mastodons, ground sloths, American horses, camels, the giant beaver, species that had existed on the continent for millions of years, disappeared within a geologically short timeframe. This extinction event was not unique to North America. Similar losses occurred in South America and Australia at approximately the same time, though the precise timing varied by region. Two main hypotheses have been proposed and debated for decades. The overkill hypothesis, developed most prominently by ecologist Paul Martin beginning in the 1960s, argues that human hunters were the primary cause, that the arrival of skilled hunters in ecosystems where large animals had no experience of human predation produced a rapid collapse of megafauna populations before they could adapt behaviorally. The climate change hypothesis argues that the rapid warming at the end of the last ice age disrupted the ecosystems that supported megafauna, reducing and fragmenting their habitats faster than they could adapt. In 2007, a research team led by geophysicist Richard Firestone published a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences proposing a new explanation for both the Younger Dryas cooling event and the Clovis disappearance. Their hypothesis: approximately 12,900 years ago, a fragmented comet or asteroid struck or exploded over the North American ice sheet, triggering a rapid cooling of the climate, massive wildfires across the continent, and the abrupt end of the Clovis culture, along with the megafauna extinctions. The evidence cited in support of this hypothesis included an unusual layer of material found at multiple archaeological sites across North America, sitting at the stratigraphic boundary between Clovis-bearing layers and the layers above them, where Clovis material disappears. This layer, sometimes called the black mat because of its dark color and organic content, contains elevated concentrations of materials that the research team argued were consistent with an extraterrestrial impact. Nanodiamonds, magnetic spherules, iridium anomalies, and the remains of charred organic material consistent with continent-wide burning. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis generated immediate and intense debate in the scientific community. Several research groups attempted to replicate the findings at the same sites using independent methods and reported inconsistent results, finding some of the claimed impact markers at some locations, but not consistently reproducing the full suite of evidence. Critics argued that the specific materials cited as impact indicators could have been produced by terrestrial processes, and that the dating of the black mat layer was not as precisely correlated across sites as the hypothesis required. Whether or not an extraterrestrial impact was involved, the Clovis archaeological record shows a clear pattern. The distinctive fluted point technology appears in abundance across North America between approximately 13,500 and 12,800 years ago, and then essentially vanishes. Above the stratigraphic layer containing Clovis material, archaeologists find different stone tool traditions: the Folsom culture, the Plano cultures, and various regional traditions that share some technological features with Clovis, but lack the signature fluting and the continental scale uniformity that characterized it. The interpretation of this transition is contested. One view holds that Clovis people were ancestors of subsequent North American cultures, and that the change in technology reflects adaptation to changed environmental conditions, specifically the loss of mammoth prey that the fluted point was optimized to hunt. Under this interpretation, Clovis people did not disappear. They adapted and are represented in the later archaeological record under different cultural labels. This view is supported by genetic evidence from ancient DNA analysis of human remains, which shows continuity of ancestral lineages across the Clovis transition, rather than wholesale population replacement. The alternative view emphasizes the abruptness of the change and the scale of the cultural discontinuity. The Clovis tradition was remarkable for its uniformity across a continent, a level of standardization that implies strong social networks maintaining a shared technological identity. The loss of that uniformity, occurring at the same time as the megafauna extinctions and the Younger Dryas climate event, suggests a significant disruption rather than a gradual evolution. Under this view, while biological descendants of Clovis people survived, the cultural tradition itself, the shared knowledge, the social networks, the hunting practices built around megafauna, did not. Ancient DNA analysis, which has advanced dramatically since the first Clovis-era human genome was sequenced from a child burial in Montana in 2014, has clarified the biological picture while leaving the cultural question open. The genetic data confirms that the people who lived in North America after the Clovis period were largely descended from the same ancestral populations as the Clovis people themselves. The question is not whether they survived biologically, but what was lost in the cultural transition. The analytical toolkit available to researchers studying the Clovis period has expanded substantially since the culture was first identified in the 1930s, and each new technique has added information while also generating new questions. Accelerator mass spectrometry dating, which can produce radiocarbon dates from very small organic samples, has allowed much more precise dating of Clovis sites than was previously possible. The resulting chronology places the Clovis occupation of North America within a window of approximately 13,500 to 12,800 years ago, a span of perhaps 700 years during which the fluted point tradition was active across the continent. This relatively narrow window makes the cultural uniformity of Clovis even more impressive, and the abruptness of its disappearance even more striking. Strontium isotope analysis of human teeth from Clovis-era burials has provided information about the mobility patterns of individuals, specifically how far they moved during their lifetimes, because strontium ratios in teeth reflect the geology of the landscape where a person grew up. Results from several sites indicate that some Clovis-era individuals grew up in regions far from where they died, consistent with the long-distance mobility and interregional connections implied by the raw material distributions. Lipid residue analysis of stone tools, extracting and identifying organic compounds trapped in the microscopic pores of stone artifacts, has provided evidence of the specific animals that Clovis tools were used to process. Mammoth, mastodon, horse, camel, and bison residues have all been identified at various sites, confirming the broad range of large prey that Clovis hunters exploited. The analysis also shows variation between sites. Some communities appear to have specialized in particular prey species more than others, suggesting that the Clovis tradition was not as behaviorally uniform as its technological standardization might imply. For most of the 20th century, the Clovis first model, the hypothesis that Clovis people represented the first human inhabitants of the Americas, was the dominant framework in American archaeology. It was defended vigorously by a generation of researchers and was supported by the absence of convincingly dated pre-Clovis sites. Then, in the 1990s and 2000s, the evidence began to accumulate that people had been in the Americas before Clovis, and the Clovis first model collapsed. The site that did more than any other to overturn the model was Monte Verde in southern Chile, excavated by Tom Dillahay of Vanderbilt University beginning in the 1970s. Monte Verde produced clear evidence of human habitation: hearths, food remains, wooden artifacts, and a child's footprint preserved in clay, dated convincingly to approximately 14,500 years ago, 1,000 years before the earliest Clovis dates. The site is in southern Chile, at the bottom of South America, which means that if humans were there 14,500 years ago, they must have been in North America even earlier to have had time to spread south. The Clovis people were not the first Americans. Subsequent discoveries have extended the pre-Clovis timeline further. The Meadowcroft rock shelter in Pennsylvania, the Paisley Caves in Oregon, and most recently, the Chiquihuite Cave in Mexico, have produced dates suggesting human presence in the Americas ranging from 14,000 to possibly 30,000 years ago, though the earliest dates remain disputed. If the most conservative pre-Clovis dates are accepted, the Clovis culture emerges not as the founding population of the hemisphere, but as a technological innovation, a new and highly successful approach to hunting megafauna that spread rapidly through a population that was already established across the continent. This reframing changes how the Clovis disappearance is understood. If Clovis was a cultural tradition rather than a founding population, its disappearance is the end of a specific way of life rather than the extinction of a people. And the question of what ended it becomes one about cultural and ecological change rather than population collapse. The physical legacy of the Clovis people consists almost entirely of stone. The distinctive points found at hundreds of sites across North America, along with the associated tools for butchering prey and processing plant material. No Clovis village has been identified. No grave goods beyond a handful of exceptional burials have been found. The organic components of Clovis material culture, wooden shafts, leather, woven plant fiber, everything that was not stone, did not survive the intervening 13 millennia in conditions that would have preserved them. The biological legacy is more complete. Ancient DNA analysis has traced lines of genetic descent from Clovis-era populations to many modern indigenous peoples of North and South America. The sequencing of the ANZIC1 genome from a child buried with Clovis artifacts in Montana approximately 12,600 years ago and published in Nature in 2014 established that the ANZIC child was ancestral to many present-day Native American populations. This genetic connection means that the Clovis people are not a mysterious disappeared race, but ancestors of living communities, a fact that has important implications for how their remains and cultural heritage are treated under current law and ethical frameworks. The Clovis story has also contributed substantially to the broader science of how humans colonized the Americas. The debate over Clovis first versus pre-Clovis models drove decades of methodological improvement in archaeological dating, site identification, and genetic analysis. The techniques developed to resolve the Clovis controversy have been applied to questions about human dispersal across the entire globe, making the investigation of this specific culture a driver of methodological progress that extends far beyond American prehistory. What remains is the central mystery, a cultural tradition of remarkable scope and consistency that appeared, spread across a continent, and transformed, or collapsed, in apparent synchrony with one of the largest extinction events in recent geological history. The precise relationship between those events is still being worked out. The Clovis story is, at its core, a story about the consequences of human arrival in an ecosystem that had never experienced skilled human hunters. The megafauna of North America had evolved over millions of years without the specific predatory pressure that humans represented. They had no behavioral repertoire for avoiding a hunter who could throw a spear from a distance, who could coordinate with other hunters to drive prey into ambush, who could sustain pursuit over distances that exhausted large animals. The result, whether it was primarily human predation, climate change, or a combination of both, was one of the most significant ecological transformations in the history of the continent. The parallel to the modern world is not comfortable, but it is real. Human populations today alter ecosystems at a scale that makes the Clovis hunters' impact look modest by comparison. The mechanisms are different: habitat destruction, pollution, and climate change rather than direct predation. But the fundamental dynamic is the same: a single, highly capable species reshaping the conditions for every other species it shares the planet with, faster than those other species can adapt. The Pleistocene extinctions are not ancient history in a meaningful sense. They are the beginning of a process that is still ongoing.